If you're going to play something on your otamatone, or write or arrange something for somebody else to play on their otamatone, you're going to want to know what works. And for the most part, what works very well on a violin or guitar is going to work pretty well on an otamatone, because this fingerboard here, you finger it the same way you would on a violin or guitar that only had one string. However, there are certain things that work just fine on a violin and really don't work the same way on an otamatone. And I'm going to talk about 3 kinds of things that work that way in this video. First, I'm going to talk about the worst of them I've encountered so far, repeated notes, which you can do very easily on a violin and which can turn into a total nightmare to play on an otamatone. Then after that, I'm going to go into 2 things that are a little bit less serious, passages that belong on the lower half of the fingerboard, down here, or, down here, and passages that belong in the upper half of the fingerboard. That's these 3 ranges. And in that case, you can take a passage that fits best in one half of the fingerboard and put it in the other, but it's usually going to get quite a bit more difficult to do so. So that's a less serious problem, but it's still one you should be aware of. That could be the introduction to some bluegrass or old-time country fiddle tune, and that's something that's easy to do on a violin. The problem is, if you try to do the same thing, even one of the 2 notes at a time on an otamatone, it's not going to work so well. I'm struggling to go that fast. What went wrong? On the violin, every time I change direction once, I get a new note. I go, ba-da-da-da-da-da. So I just have to go this fast. On the otamatone, in order to play a new note that's at the same pitch, I have to bring my finger down, pull it up, and bring it down again. That's 2 motions, and when you have to do the same motion over and over again, and it's a really small motion, it gets hard to do that fast. It's like if you tried to type with one finger. You wouldn't be able to type nearly as fast as when you type with all 10. So that's that sort of passage. Whenever you see it, the first thing you should think is, how can I avoid having to play this particular line under otamatone? Because there isn't really any good solution to it. But the best solution I can offer, and the one I used in my most recent video with considerable difficulty, is to do something called crosshatching. Find both notes and then alternate. If 2 otamatones are playing, the second one plays the reversed notes. That's called crosshatching, and it's pretty hard to do well, because if one of you is a little bit out of tune, the final product might sound something like what you're hearing right now behind me. That faint sound of despair is the sound of a bad crosshatching. If you get it just right, it might sound more like this, which is easier to deal with. But in general, you should try to avoid having to play repeated the same notes on an otamatone more than absolutely necessary. The other way you can deal with it with some passage is do something, just change the notes a little bit. If you use 2 different fingers and alternate them, it's relatively easy to play fast. So something like, I can play much faster than, and the second line could go. So find a way to turn it into little ba-da-dum, ba-da-da, little ornaments like that, and the passage will sound fancier, but it'll be a lot easier to play. That's a passage that's going to work very well in any of the 3 low registers as far as ease to play on an otamatone, and it's not going to work very well in a high register. And the simple reason why is that we have a lot of a lot of fast notes with notes that are close together in pitch. That is, we're not going da 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 da. We're going da 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 da. And that works very well in the low register where there are wide distances between the notes. If I try to play this in one of the high registers, let's say well, I'll just take it up the octave. The last little lick worked, but I was starting to smear the notes a little bit. And that's because on this Otamatone fingerboard, you go, that's an octave. That's also an octave, but my hand barely moved in comparison. And those notes are so close together that it's very hard to play fast passages in general on any of the three upper registers. In contrast, there's something that's going to work a lot better in a high register than a low register. Although it's going to be, in general, high register work is harder to play anyway, because you have to be so precise. I was able to just throw that out, even if it wasn't entirely in tune. I was able to just throw that out because those long gaps between notes are only a little short distance. If I tried to play the same thing in a low register, it would... I completely missed the shift. Why? Because I'm having to jump all over the place. Once again, I can do it in the wrong register, but you can clearly hear the difference in how well I play. I'm obviously doing something extremely fancy and kind of ridiculously hard when I start playing these things in the wrong register. So those are two examples of passages that are low register and high register passages, where if you're going to play or write something like that on an Otamatone, you'd better make sure you put it in the right octave. If you've got a passage that's stuck in the wrong register, the solution is just to transpose it an octave. It's too wide, we take it up the octave. Yay, it's easier. Similarly, my fingers are going to cramp. But if I take it down the octave, now it got a lot easier. I can also go the other direction if I need to. I can take this up the octave instead and flip the register switch at the back from medium to high. When you take it up the octave and flip the switch, you're going to end up in the alternate register anyway. So the answer to all of these passages in the wrong register is to transpose it either down or up an octave.